Running? Yes, it is. Okay. And we're really going to look at the nuts and bolts of how you can build and control an automated workflow. Okay, and this connects to the email system. I'll flip over a little bit towards the end and just talk a little bit about email with regard to, say, bulk email, things like that. But automation is really the more complex of the two, and that's where I want to spend the most time so that you can start to think about how you want to deploy this and really own the system.
Yes.
For today, we're actually here in my sandbox as opposed to in yours, because here I have automation fully enabled. And you'll notice that in your sandbox, you don't have full automation yet. That won't be enabled for you until you're in your live environment.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, should be today.
Oh, well, there you go.
I've been working with Emily, and there's been a few snafus on the first starts, but I think we've got it all worked out, and I'm guessing today we'll be done with that.
Excellent. Well, then it won't be a very long wait.
Yes.
You'll be in good shape. Okay. So, automation. We'll go over here. It's the little squiggle with the plus on it. I heard someone call it the ice cream cone icon. I don't really know what kind of ice cream they've been eating.
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
Oh, I can see it. It's a person holding an ice cream cone, and the X is the ice cream cone.
I guess maybe.
Uh-huh.
You have to work hard on that, though.
Yeah.
See? But so this is where I manage these automations, and I can do this here in sort of the quote-unquote CRM side of Virtuous. And if I were to toggle over to the marketing side of Virtuous, I have access to automation there too. Lives in both places.
Does it look the same in both places?
Yep, it's absolutely the same thing. It's just two ways to get to it. Because someone who's doing marketing might spend all their time on the marketing side, because that's where I create emails and where I can control my automations, where I can design lead forms. And so for them, they might not have a need to flip over to CRM and look at campaigns and look at contacts. They might kind of live on the marketing side.
So I have a quick initial question.
Sure.
When I fire up my live environment and I'm all set to go, and I open this, what if any pre-made flows or automation? What do you call each of these? What's the proper?
Right. Well, we're going to get there.
Okay.
So each of these are workflows. Okay. So that's the idea with these processes, and they're all processes that I design. It could be, some people think about it in the if this then that terms, right? If this is true, then do that.
And what do I get initially when I first fire it up? What are like the standard ones, if any?
There's a big white screen here.
Okay.
Right, and then we'll look. There's a couple of best practice ones built in that we'll take a look at in a second.
Okay. All right. I'll set up.
No, you're fine. But the big thing to keep in mind with these, and I can't stress it enough, because I ask people a lot of times, I'll say, well, hey, look, what do you want to automate? You're looking at automation. What do you want to automate? And the answer a lot of times is, well, if someone signs up on our website, I want them to get an email, right? If someone comes to an event, I don't want to send them an email, say, thanks for coming. I'm like, okay, great. And then what's next? And the answer is usually, I don't know. And the thing is, you can script a much larger process than just thing happens, response goes out, right? It can be a whole series of actions that take place. And then if in response to those actions, the donor does X, here's what I want to happen next. You can script out something much larger than just an if this, then that kind of binary thing. So that's the thing I want to stress, right? And so whenever you're building your workflow, and when I say building your workflow, I should really say designing your workflow, because I'm not talking about the work that you do here in Virtuous to put it together, right? The real work of planning, it happens outside the tool, on a whiteboard, on a whatever. And when you're doing that, always ask yourself, what's next? What's the next step? And many times the next step is simply to say thank you, right? I asked the donor to do something, to give me money, to make a recurring gift, to sign up for this event, whatever it is. They did the thing I asked for. So thank you, right? And if that's it, if that's what's next is thank you, great. But always challenge yourself and say, well, what's the next part of this? Until you've really exhausted it and you've really built a process that is complete. Now, each of these workflows, right, is something that I can design for myself. I click on create a workflow up here in the upper right. And again, when you get in there, you won't see all these workflows. These are all ones that I've already got in here. You're going to see a big blank screen, but you can click on create a workflow. And that's where you get the two options. You can create your own custom workflow, so build your own from scratch. Or there are these pre-built best practice workflows to get you started. And the key with these is they are not push button completely done. These are frameworks that will require some customization from you before you can turn it on and let it rip. Okay. And so if I look at the best practice ones, there's 4 in here for me to choose from. The one I want to use today, and one I like to use for a lot of these sessions because it has a pretty good example of how this works, is this donor lifecycle automation. So we'll click on that. And it'll take a second, and it'll bring us in. Here we go. There's my donor life cycle. Now, at the top of the screen, it has this big warning about how I need to update workflow emails. And it tells me there's a lot of emails in here with placeholder copy. And that's true. When we build this out, and the minute you build this workflow, if you create it in your environment, it will drop 7 emails into your email tool. And those 7 emails are all filled with essentially instructions for how to write the email. Right? It'll say, put 3 bullets about your mission here. Sum up what you do here. And you don't want to send that email out to people. It would look bad. I have, which is entertaining, I've actually gotten that email from my daughter's school. They sent out an email that was parent update template. Put first paragraph here. Here, list 3 upcoming events. And they just sent out the template because someone messed up. And it cracked me up because I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I know how that happened. Same thing, right? You don't want to send that out to your donors, just looks bad. So you'll see this every time as a warning. We want to make sure it's pretty obvious. This is a big part of what I mentioned in terms of it does need some personalization, some customization before you turn it on. It'll make sure that you understand so you can't dismiss it by accident. And then even once you do, each of the emails is going to have a little red flag here telling you, hey, don't forget, this hasn't been published yet. You haven't finished it yet. So you want to go in and customize each of those emails. But this is my workflow. And so this particular workflow, so automation is made up of workflows, right? This particular workflow happens to have 4 steps to it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then over here we got 4. That's what each of these columns are. Each column is a step. So automation is made up of workflows. Each of those workflows is made up of steps. And each of these steps is tied to a query. You can see that here. It's got this query associated with it, this DLC non-donors query, first-time donor query. Each of these queries is a saved contact query. Okay, underline that in your notes, highlight it, whatever it is. It's contact queries only. I cannot trigger a workflow off of a gift query or a pledge query or anything else. Everything about automation and everything is contact centric. All revolves around that contact. Okay? This is a big reason why the nested query function exists, so that I can still take data that comes from a gift query or a pledge query or an event query or whatever it is and nest that into the contact query I want to use to drive my automation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the way this works is with these queries, the query is setting who belongs in each of these steps. So if you match to the non-donor query, you're a non-donor and you belong in this step. And then these actions will start taking place. You've got automation is made up of all these workflows. The workflows can each have 1 or more steps. Each of those steps can have 1 or more actions. Those are your basic building blocks here. And so the way this works is that automation is an automated process, runs once a day, every day, in the early morning. Okay. And so the system is going to run, in this case, it'll run these 4 queries to figure out who matches, and then it'll assign them to these steps. And so, for example, this non-donor step, and this query, the queries also for this will require a little tweaking, usually a little refinement. They're designed to give you a start. They're pretty broad at the outset. So for example, this non-donor query, if I click on the query, it'll show me the criteria for it. The non-donor query just says someone whose life-to-date gift count is 0. They've never given anything. And so let's say that a new person, new name goes onto your website and they sign up to get your newsletter. So you've got a new name, so they get added to the Virtuous database. Right? Next morning, automation runs. It sees that new name. They've never made a gift, so they match to this non-donor query. So they get pulled into this step. So the system is going to tag them as a non-donor. It's going to send them this first non-donor email, kind of an introductory email. Then it's going to wait for 3 days. It's got a 3-day delay built in. Then it's going to create a task. And that task is assigned to me. You can see that in here to give them a welcome call. And it says right here that that task is due in 3 days. So it's going to give me 3 days lead time. I'll get an email that says, hey, you have a task due in 3 days. And it gives me 3 days to get it done. And it's going to wait for 3 days. It doesn't stop. It's not dependent on me making that call. It's just going to give me the time that I need to do it. And then it's going to keep on going. It's going to send them email number 2. And the sequence is going to alternate between delaying 5 or 3 days. It's going to send them about 5 emails in total. And maybe this person gets the 3rd email, and that 3rd email has an ask in it. And they decide, yeah, I like what these guys are doing. I'm going to give them some money. Click on donate. They make a gift. Then you're going to import that. It's part of gift entry. And the next morning, when automation runs, this person doesn't match to non-donor anymore. They've made a gift. So they're out of that non-donor step. It'll stop right there. They'll never get email 4. They'll never get email 5 because they don't match anymore. Okay. Instead, now they match to this first-time donor step. So that's where they end up. And so then we'll take off the non-donor tag. We'll add that first-time donor tag. I get a task to send them a handwritten thank you card. They get an email saying thank you. And these 4 things all happen on the same day, right in a row, right? There's no break in these. And then it'll delay for 5 days, giving me time to send that thank you card, and it'll send them the next email in the sequence and continue on from there. But that, in a nutshell, is what the automation process looks like. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
How does the system know to, like in your first example of a non-donor, so you run the query, they show up as a non-donor, they start into this first cycle, and then the system runs it again the next day, and presumably they're still a non-donor.
Right.
How does the system know, not to start all over again? How does it track where a person is in this cycle?
Because it tracks what step, or not even just what step, but what action someone is on.
Okay.
Right. So if they stay in that step, they'll continue on to the next action in the sequence. So, hey, they matched to non-donor. Let's tag them. Let's send them an email. And then it hits this delay and it says, okay, that's all I have for today. So stop.
Right.
Next day, it runs the query. They still match. These things have already happened. So, okay, it's time for a delay. Stop. Next day, they're still here. Time for a delay until it hits the next task to create. Right, it'll do that, and then it'll stop again. But it keeps track of where someone is in that sequence. So they don't always start at the top.
Right. Okay. And so then once they're through this, say in your example, that person doesn't respond at all. So they'll end up going all the way through this first series of actions. They'll get the 5 emails and say they didn't do anything. They're still a non-donor. They haven't done anything. Then what?
Then the way that this is constructed, they just drop out the bottom.
Right.
Right.
So they've gotten the first series of stuff. They haven't responded, so they remain a non-donor. Right.
Yep. And we'll come back to that because there's a couple of options there. But again, the way that this is constructed, this just stops, right? They drop out and they can drop in and out. So let's say that a month goes by, they've been sitting on those emails, they've started getting your newsletter in the meantime, and they finally say to themselves, man, I like those guys. I'm going to give them some of my money. And so they decided to do it. And it's a month after this whole sequence has stopped. That's fine. They can still drop back in once they become a first-time donor.
Right. But this particular automation wouldn't then like wait another, say, 6 months and repeat this process, right? There's nothing that would trigger that kind of action.
Not the way that this is constructed.
Could I, for instance, if I wanted to say, hit them again, I could add a step at the very end that was like delay 30 days and send them another email?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Or could I, yeah, okay. I get it.
Okay. All right. And again, we'll come back to that idea of what happens in the case of them not responding. There's a few things that are in the automation settings, but we'll get to that piece of it. So a few other things I want to layer in, and then we'll add on.
Okay.
Now from here, right, if I wanted to add another step in addition to these 4, I got a big blue button up here to add a step. I can go ahead and do it. I give it a name, and then I search for the contact query I want to associate with it. I should already have that query built. Again, we already mentioned all the design should be done. I should have my queries built, my email copy written, everything else. This is final assembly by the time I'm here. As opposed to, I come into Virtuous, I open up the automation thing and I start to wing it a little bit. Not so much. Okay. Then I have little grab handles here. I can also do these steps around. So if I want to change the order of things or how this process looks, I can do that. I can do the same thing with all the actions. I can use the little grab handles to move everything around. And to add an action, another big blue button. And I want to look at all the different actions that are available. There are some that are not included in this workflow as well. And just highlight a couple things about these to keep in mind. So the first one is the delay. It's not the sexiest of all the actions. It's the nothing action. Delays are always in a whole number of days. Okay, there's no delay half a day because this is a daily process, right? Once a day, every day in the morning. That's when it's going to run. The key thing with the delay too, and what this always underscores about automation is within an automation, you really don't control the schedule. It's not yours. This is not the tool that you use to send everybody an email on Thursday at 10:30 in the morning. Right? You can do that through mass email. The only thing that you can control to any degree is the pace at which different actions occur. But even within that, it's really more in the donor's hands than it is in yours. Because the example we talked about here, right? Hey, someone gets this email and they choose to give. You say, well, what if they wait a month and then they give, right? When they move to first-time donor is entirely in their hands.
Right.
As great as your email is, great as everything else is, there's no way to say reliably it's always going to be email number 4 where they pull the trigger. And so you want to be careful about that if you especially have multiple workflows running. Because a contact can only be in one of these steps at any given time. Okay, this is a linear process, right? I want to turn them from a non-donor to a first-time donor and so on. So they're going to move through these steps one at a time. But a donor can be in, or a contact can be in multiple workflows at once. So all those workflows we saw on the automation page, they can be in 3 or 4 of those at any given time. We had a client who had 3 workflows they were doing as like intro series because they had 3 different ways someone could get involved with their org. And they sat down for a few days and they carefully crafted all of their workflows with delays and everything else. And they said to me in a training, hey, we're really proud. We set it up so all the delays are set up so that nothing will ever overlap. And no one will ever get 2 emails on the same day. And I felt really bad because the first thing I said to them is, hey, that's awesome. But what if this person makes a donation here? And they were like, then it falls apart. So don't try to get too cute with some of the delays and things because it's in the donor's hands. It's not in yours.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
It's not like a calendar-based thing.
Right.
It's the timing is all relative to the donor's response, the delays you build into it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And the donor's actions.
And the
You know,
donor,
that's the big thing is everybody starts at a different place, right? This person came into the sequence today. So like we mentioned earlier, they're at the first set of actions. This other person came in, you know, a couple days before. So they're at the second set of actions. They're getting the welcome call. Someone else is at email 3, someone else is on email 2. Everybody's at a different point in that process depending on when they started, you know? So yeah, that's the big thing. It's all centered around the donor's experience, their actions. That's what's triggering this more than anything else.
Now, I presume that you could end up shooting yourself in the foot if you craft a bunch of these things like the example you were saying. I could imagine it being possible that the donor would be, if they're interacting and getting into these processes, if you don't do it right, they may end up either getting inundated or I don't know, getting emails that kind of like don't make sense because one email is a response to one of their actions and another is in response to another, and they got the one before the other, and I don't know. It seems like it's you got to be careful. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
You do have to be, again, you got to be careful with how these will interact with each other and how they'll overlap with each other.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. So that's delays. So the next is email. You see there's 2 different email options.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the first one says send grid email. It's deprecated. That's true. That's from an old version of automation.
Mm-hmm.
So we have folks that have older workflows that we don't want to break. They're still running. So we have that there. But you're going to be using Virtuous email.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so here, again, this is final assembly. All my parts are ready. And so I'm just going to search for the email that I've already written that I want to pull in here. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's automation training. Hey, look at that. There is a big blue button to create a new email.
Mm-hmm.
That would be if I'm flying by the seat of my pants and I forgot to create one of them. The big difference is when I create an email in Virtuous Email, I can use some of my templates that I've created for my organization.
Mm-hmm.
If I create an email from here, this is 100% winging it. I can't select a template.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to take me to the blank editor and I'd have to recreate it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your best practice really is I want to create it from, I want to create it in Virtuous Marketing, and then I want to pull it in here.
Mm-hmm.
You can override the sender. Every email has a from email, from name, a sender, but you can override that here if you need something that'll fit more in with the rest of the emails in the workflow. You can do the same thing with the subject line. Every email needs a subject line, but here I could override what I had set up for the subject line. And then I'm going to select who's the target for this email. I mentioned before that everything here is contact centric, and it really is. And so by default, when I send an email, it's going to go to the primary email address for the primary individual on that record. Okay. If it's, John and Sarah Jane Smith, John is the primary, John Smith gets the email.
Mm-hmm.
I could say primary and secondary. If I have an email address for John and an email for Sarah Jane, they both get the email.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you've got Virtuous as a contact, you got 10 of us on there and you got all our email addresses. You could send it to all 10 of us. Okay, but you're going to determine what that targeting looks like, and that's going to apply to anybody that goes through this step and gets sent this email.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so keep that in mind when you're trying to design your workflows too. It's not going to communicate with 2 different members of the household differently. The household is going through the workflow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then you have following. Okay, so remember, you can follow or unfollow any contact, and that essentially lets you subscribe to their feed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that on your dashboard, you can see when they get sent to mailer, when they make a gift, when they talk to somebody, etc. Someone's a really key donor and you want to keep up to date on what's going on with them, you can choose to follow them. You can also automate that. So you could say, hey, if someone makes a donation that's greater than $10,000, I want to follow them and see what they do next. Totally fine. But you're going to just select whether this is a follow or an unfollow, and then you're going to specify which user is doing the following or the unfollowing. And they do all of the following or unfollowing for this step. And that's kind of critical. It's the same thing with tasks, right? If we skip to tasks for a second, we have some tasks in this workflow. The title should be specific. Don't just say phone call, because I'm going to get that task. It's going to say, you've been assigned a task, phone call. You're like, about what? Welcome call is better. Major donor thank you call. Great. The days till due, we talked about. How much advance notice am I getting before it's due? And then, who's the team member? And they get all of those tasks. So in this particular workflow here for first-time donor, right, it's got this handwritten thank you card task assigned to me. So I'm going to get prompted to create a handwritten thank you card for every single person that makes their first donation, regardless of size of gift or anything else. Maybe that's great. For a smaller org, sometimes it is. Maybe I'd rather have some routing rules around that task. Most often that's the case, right? Hey, I don't want this one person doing it all, but if the gift is less than this certain amount, the task is send our standard thank you. If it's greater than this certain amount, then this person's going to make a personal phone call. If it's greater than this amount, this person's going to send them a handwritten thank you note card, whatever it is. And it might be 3 different people who have those 3 different tasks. If I want to build that in, or if I want to build in routing rules based on who owns the contact, right? Maybe that's the differentiator here is, hey, I've got some folks in here and they've got a couple of different contact owners, right? And I want to base this on, who owns X, Y, or Z. Great, I can do that too. If I want to base this on contact ownership, if I want to base it on the gift size, I want to base it on whatever it is, I want to have these routing rules built into it. That means I'm going to need to have a different query, right, and a different step to set that up, to control that for everybody. So this would be the query, and the step for, maybe this would be for gifts less than 1,000, and I'd create another step with another query to find anybody whose first gift was greater than 1,000, right? And there, it might look like the same actions. Take off the non-donor tag, add the first-time donor tag. The emails might be the same, maybe slightly different copy, and then the task might be in the same place. The only difference is it's a slightly different task and it's assigned to a different user. Okay, nothing wrong with mirroring a lot of that step and then just tweaking 1 or 2 things for my new step. Does that make sense?
Does, yeah.
Okay. And so anytime I have routing rules, if it's, hey, I'm going to assign them to an owner based on the state they're in, based on the project, based on whatever, same thing. I've got to have some routing rules built in. I've got to have a new step. I've got to have a new query to be able to do that. Okay. And it's, it's not a dynamic thing where I say, hey, if the owner is X, assign task to owner, right? It's if the owner is X, assign the task to, and I specify the user. Keep that in mind too. Okay. All right. Now, some of the other actions in here. Organization groups. I can automate organization group assignments or removing people from organization groups. Now, automating portfolio assignments and things like that, usually not so much. It might be that I'm automating assigning someone to an organization group that I'm using for qualification, right, or something like that. More often, if it's a major gifts scenario, I'm automating the removal of folks from portfolios, because major gift officers are often really good at asking for new prospects, but not so good at culling the dead ones out of their portfolios. So maybe I want to automate that part of the process. Totally fine. right? Or I want to automate assignments based on teams or regions. Totally fine. I can build that in. Same thing applies, right? If I've got a couple different organization group options and it's going to be determined on the state someone lives in, multiple steps, multiple queries. I can add or remove. There you go. Custom fields. I can automatically populate values in custom fields based on any of this criteria. It is only for contact custom fields because, again, contact-centric. Right? So it's not gifts, it's not individuals, it's only contacts. And I can select the field I want it to be. That's a text field. That's a bad example. Here's a list field. So maybe it's 2017 sponsorship. Oh, for crying out loud, I know. And, oh, I've been selecting too many actions here. Let's go back. I confused it once and for all. For 2017 sponsorship, hey, if the gift is this size, that makes them a, benefit party vendor or whatever it is. If the gift is this type, it's this value. Again, same rules. Multiple possibilities, multiple values would require multiple steps and multiple queries to control that. Okay. Now, the one action we didn't talk about is tags. And tags can play a lot of roles within automation. Tags are going to be your best friend when it comes to automation. So with tags, you've got the idea of tags as actions. Here, I'm using tags in the context of a larger workflow so that I can identify for myself, well, what lifecycle stage is someone at? When I look at their contact record, I know they're at the non-donor stage, right? They're at the first-time donor stage. They're a sustaining donor, et cetera. And as we move on, you see that we've built in tag removal for all of the previous tags. Right? By the time we get to major donor, we're potentially removing all the previous tags because someone could skip right from non-donor to major donor. They're a non-donor and suddenly they give a 7-figure gift. They skip over the other steps because maybe that qualifies them for major donor and they land right there. I want to make sure there's no possibility of someone being tagged as both a non-donor and a major donor because that would be really bad for data polls. So I've got to build in that removal. If they don't have the non-donor tag, when they get here, nothing breaks.
Okay.
It just says, hey, take off the non-donor tag. They don't have it? Totally cool. What's next? They don't have the tag, there's nothing to remove, it's totally fine with that. Then it'll add the major donor tag and be done. Now you can also have workflows set up simply to apply tags to your records. There are the lapsed and pre-lapsed system tags, right, that apply those values to folks based on their giving history. Right? And I know we talked in our first training about those. Hey, how can I customize those? Well, you can create a workflow that looks for people that have met certain criteria in terms of their giving and then applies tags, whether they're your internal version of a lapsed tag. Because again, you can't turn off the system tags, but you can create your own classifications for donors. And it could be based on defining certain like deeply lapsed or defining libunts and sibunts, right? It could be based on identifying people's giving interests. Hey, these people tend to give to projects in X region of the world or of X type. I want to tag them as having that interest automatically so that then when I look for people who are interested in this type of cause, they'll come up with my tag list. A lot of different ways to use automation just to apply those tags and have the system manage them for you. So you don't have to do anything. The more tags you can have the system apply for you as opposed to making them manual, the easier it'll be. Now the other thing is, beyond having tags available as actions, you can include tags in your query. Right. So not only do I have the ability to have the tags added or removed, but they could be built into the query criteria that determines where someone falls in this workflow. And by combining those two things, you end up with a lot of control over essentially how someone moves through automation. Okay. I'll give you, 2 quick examples. first, we had a client that was building an automated workflow, kind of like this one, this first step where we've got this series of emails going out. But we talked already about how in this scenario here, right, someone makes a donation, this all stops, right? They don't get the rest of these emails. They go to the next step. Well, this client had the opposite. They needed someone to get all of the emails. It was all like prep emails for, I think it was a mission trip or an event. So they had to get all 5 emails, and then once they had gotten all 5 emails, they needed to move to the next step in the process. So what they did was they added another action at the bottom here, which was adding a tag. The tag was something like step 2, right? Event prep step 2. And then the query for the next step was simply anybody who has that tag, event prep step 2. Because the next day it's going to query for everybody. They've had that tag applied over here, so that'll move them over to the next step, and then they can proceed through that step. The key is, if you want to do something like that, what you want to be careful of is we had someone do that same type of thing, and then what they did is the first action here was remove tag, event prep step 2. Well, now that person no longer matches to the query. So after these first few actions take place, that person's out of this step. Right? You don't want to invalidate your own query. You want to be careful about that within a workflow, especially if you've got multiple workflows interacting. Be careful about invalidating queries through your actions. If you want to remove that step 2 tag, you got to wait till the end. Add it at the bottom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing is you can use tags this way to manually add someone to an email sequence. No worries. Because, so let's say you wanted to reach out to folks who are our current sort of active but mid-level donors who you think could upgrade their support, right? Sort of an upgrade drip campaign or upgrade campaign. So you put together this cycle of, 5, 6, 7 emails. You've got a step very much like this non-donor one with this whole list of emails that go out. It's probably a simple workflow. Second step is just like the thank you step for people who do. And you want to send that out, but you're not going to send it out to a group that meets a rigid criteria for length of giving and everything else. It's going to be more something that gift officers and development staff will do on a case-by-case basis. Well, I could set it up so that the criteria for this is upgrade campaign, a tag called upgrade campaign. Anybody who has that tag gets these emails. Then that means that you can manually look at a contact and say, okay, I'm going to tag them as upgrade campaign. And that means the next day they'll start getting those emails just by adding the tag. So whenever you're stuck in automation, trying to make something happen, not sure how to move someone from one step to the other, how can I accomplish this? Anytime someone comes to me with those questions, 9 times out of 10, the answer is, have you thought about using a tag?
Okay.
Any questions on that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I have a silly question I think I know the answer to, and that is just a representation of the different steps on the screen from non-donor, first time, sustaining. Okay, so that looks logical, but like you were showing, you can move these steps around.
Yep.
That doesn't really change anything that the system does, right? There's no systematic concern about which order they're in. Is that right?
There is. There actually is.
Okay. So what happens if I just swapped some of these?
It'll change the order in which things can occur. So we'll talk about this, then we'll go flip over to something else. But the idea here, right, is I've defined this as a process. Yeah. I want them to start here, and I want them to progress through, theoretically, all the way up to major donor.
Yeah.
Great. In order for that to happen, though, for someone to move forward, I can't run these queries A, I can't run them parallel to each other because someone might match to more than one. So I've got to run them in sequence, one, then the other, then the other. And I can't run them in order from left to right, because if I had someone who's a recurring donor, they're a sustaining donor, right? And then they suddenly gave a gift that was large enough one day to qualify as a major donor. But if I'm running this sustaining donor query first every time, they'll never move past this point. They'll always be stuck right here. So instead, when we run these queries for your automation, we run them in reverse order from right to left. Okay? So we're going to run the major donor query first, and we're going to see who matches to that. They get assigned to this step. Then we take everybody who's left, and we're going to run them against this query. And we're going to see who matches there. I take everybody who's left and run them against this query, and we're going to work backwards to assign contacts to steps. So if I do switch this order around, right, that's what's, this is now saying, hey, major donor is essentially my end point. That trumps anything else that happens. If I were to instead switch this order around, because I said, hey, it doesn't really matter, and I put first time donor here, I put that over at the end. Well, then I'm going to match people to that query first before I put them into major donor or anything else. Okay, so I want to be cautious about that. And that's also something to keep in mind when you troubleshoot your workflow. Okay, because when I turn this workflow on, and I'll show you in a second, you can do it from the automations screen. But if I'm here, I would hit on actions, and I want to run workflow. And I get to decide, do I want to start the daily process, or am I itching for this to happen right stinking now? Run it now, and then tomorrow you'll pick up your regular routine. Okay. Now, before I do that, though, because I'm about to send a bunch of emails to people in my database, maybe sight unseen, I usually want to test it. And to test it, you can come in here and say, I want to run enrollment. Because testing email is easy. I create an email. I can send a test email to myself. I can see what it looks like on my phone. I can get a sense of what's going to happen on an individual email. How's that going to look when I open it up? But here, I'm less concerned about how does that email look, and I'm more concerned about who's going to get that email, right? What's going to happen when I send that email? And that's why I run enrollment. You notice all my edit icons went away. I can't move stuff around. I can't drag stuff around or anything, because now the system is going to run these 4 queries in the order that it would when it runs automation, and it's going to sort contacts into these 4 steps for me so that I can see, hey, when you turn this on, what's going to happen? And it comes back to me with counts. So it says, hey, there's 491 contacts that are going to be at major donor. If I'm curious who they are, it'll show me, and I've even got a search. So if I said, hey, I know that Tina Powell should be here. Oh, good, she is. If I don't know why she's here, click on the eyeball. That'll show you her profile. And I can check it out. But so I can vet each of these steps. And if I said, wow, this seems like a low number for sustaining donor, and I went into the query tool and I say, well, let me check this out. So let's say it's sustaining donor, and we'll do 1.15.19. And I run that query to see, well, like, what happens then? 'Cause 17, I have more recurring donors than 17. Yeah, I got 128 people. Well, yeah, there's 128 contacts, but, the rest of them are all major donors as well. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the big thing to keep in mind as far as the sequence of events and the sequence of your steps. Okay. All right. A couple other things I want to touch on. So let's go up a level to the marketing automation page. Here's all the workflows we started at. Here's the one we just built. Donor lifecycle right in there. When we created this, it went right to the workflow because it was one of the best practice workflows. And we skipped over a few settings that you'll see if you're creating a new custom workflow from scratch. So here you can give the workflow a name. You can link it to one of your campaigns. And then down here, you're going to decide, for example, who do you want to run this against? Is it all contacts, or is it going to be new contacts? So all contacts, hey, every contact in the database is fair game. They're eligible to be pulled into these queries. New contacts, right? That lets me define what new means for this particular workflow. So our workflow, the donor lifecycle, that first query we saw just says life to date, gift count is 0. Someone could be in your database for 5 years. Maybe they're a volunteer. They've just never given financially. They would match that. Life to date, gift count is 0. And if I send them an email that says, great to meet you, here's who we are, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
So I want to be careful about that. So maybe I say, hey, look, this is all about new name acquisition. So only send this to new contacts. And when I say new, I'm going to turn this workflow on next week. So anybody who's created on or after the 20th, they're fair game. Now the trick with the donor lifecycle workflow is those 3rd and 4th steps. They're really about tagging people who match the sustaining donor or the major donor criteria. And maybe I want those to be available for any contact, no matter how long they've been in the database. If that's the case, then I need to run it against all contacts, and that new contact, that create date parameter, I'd have to add that to the query. So instead of it just saying life to date gift count is 0, I'd have to add life to date gift count is 0 and create date greater than 1/20/2019.
Right, okay.
To make that my starting point. So I can control it from the query, that's totally fine, or I can drive it from here from the workflow settings, if it's going to apply to all steps.
Got it.
And then down here is this allow re-enrollment checkbox. This goes back to something that you asked about earlier with what happens to that person who doesn't respond to anything in my non-donor step. By default, we do not allow re-enrollment when you create a new workflow. And the best practice workflows do not have re-enrollment enabled on them, with the exception of the donor retention one.
Okay.
And so that means that once someone has gone through a particular step, once they've had a particular action applied, it can't happen again. It's one and done. Okay. If I do decide to allow re-enrollment, then that means that as long as someone matches the query criteria, they're fair game. And so if I did allow re-enrollment for the donor lifecycle, someone doesn't respond to any of this and they're still a non-donor, they would end up right back up at the top and they'd start getting that same sequence of emails again. And then they would either decide to give to get me to stop it, or they would tell me to go away. One of those two.
And where in the workflow would I know whether that re-enrollment was clicked or not?
The only place that you're going to know it is in those settings. So once the once this workflow is created, from here, if I click edit, that's actually editing the workflow settings, and that's where I would be able to see.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And you'll also notice this checkbox is sort of faint right here. I can't click it now. Okay. Allowing re-enrollment is something you can only do when you're creating a workflow, but I can't then toggle that back and forth, because you could really create problems. Right. If you took an existing workflow and you suddenly turned on re-enrollment, everybody started going through it again and again. There are places where you can see where allowing re-enrollment is important. For example, we've had folks say, hey, look, I've got some of my fundraisers, and anytime someone who's in their organization group makes a gift greater than $500, I want them to get pinged to give them a personal thank you call. I don't want that to just happen the first time a donor gives a gift that size. I want it to happen every time a donor gives a gift that size. That would be a case where I do want to allow re-enrollment. So if that person gives a $500 gift, they're going to get a thank you call, and then 6 months later they give another $500 gift. Same thing, creates another task to give them a large gift, quote unquote, thank you call. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what that setting does there. Okay. From here, you can also click on View to go back into where we were, where you can see all the steps laid out, or you can hit Start. It gives you the same options we saw before. Do you want to start the daily process? Do you want it to run right now? And then start the daily process afterwards. Okay. Any questions on that before I just real quickly show you the email editor and the email tool?
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, what does the reports button do?
It shows you reports.
Okay. And then, Then the other question is a little bit more on when I'm developing a new workflow and I'm wanting to test it out before I go live with it and accidentally send a bunch of emails that I didn't do right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I understand right, step one is just to run, I think, run enrollment.
Yep.
So I see like, okay, who's ending up getting, getting identified in this particular step. Then what if I want to, let's see, what other best practices should I be doing to make sure that the workflow is working the way I want it, and I don't end up sending a bunch of emails that I didn't want to, or initiating some kind of interaction with the contact that I hadn't baked out yet. So I think it's one thing to see, okay, it looks like I'm getting the right people in the right buckets, but what's the best practice for ensuring that then what happens on the contact side is really what I intended to happen?
I mean, the only things you can do, you can run enrollment to test that, again, people are being flagged and identified in the right steps, right?
Yep.
If you run enrollment and everybody lands at step 3, well, there is a problem.
Yeah.
The other thing to look for, and again, it comes up a lot, right, is, again, check to see, do any of your steps, any of the actions in your steps conflict with what's in the query? So many times I'll see that again and again. Hey, you said here you want to query for everybody who's given life to date at least $100, or everybody who has the tag $100 giver, and then first thing you do is remove the tag $100 giver. We can't really do that, right? Hey, here you're taking off the thing. You're saying, hey, remove them from this organization group. And here you're saying, give me anybody who's in this organization group. Those two things conflict. That's not necessarily evident from running enrollment, but it's one of the things that you really need to look for. Do any of my queries conflict with the actual actions in each of the steps? And that's just a matter of opening up the query. Right, you saw how we did that when you're reviewing the steps. You can open up that query and see it in another tab and saying, okay, looking at this query over here, does any of the criteria here conflict with any of the actions that I have in here? Tags are where it happens most often.
Okay.
Right, tags are usually the thing where I've got that going on most often, but that's what I really want to check for. And that's one of the sort of the things you'll trip over.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So real quickly, I've got a couple of minutes here. I'm going to toggle over to Virtuous Marketing. Here we are. So over here in Virtuous Marketing, again, I can access automation. It's the exact same automation. Right, there's our donor lifecycle that we built. It's just a new way to get to it. Right, I can get to my query tool from here because, again, if I'm building automations, I need to be able to build the queries that are going to drive those automations. And I can even get to campaigns from here because if I'm doing a lot of the marketing work, I might be setting up some of the campaigns that we're going to use. But the default page that you land on is this emails page, and this lists all the emails that have been created in here, right, whether they've been sent or not. I do have a filter over here to help me find a particular email that I'm looking for, right? So if I've been working on a particular email and I want to find it based on the name, I can find it based on the name. Totally fine. And then up here from my actions, I can create a new email, create a template, right from here. Over here in the templates side of things, you're going to see that I've got some custom templates for my organization that look spectacular. And then there are some Virtuous templates that are available out of the box to get you started. Right, and so maybe I like the design of some of these templates and I want to take it and tweak it to make it work for my organization. Well, I could click on the three dots here and say, I want to use this template to make a new template. Save it for my org. Or if I'm going to send an email, hey, here's the template I want to use. I'm going to use this to send a new email. Okay, then here I'm going to give it a name of the email. We're going to call it January Automation, because I'm running out of fake names at this point, I'm pretty sure. I need to associate this with an email list. Maybe it's my general list. What's the subject line? Hello there. Right, I can specify the from name and the from email. If I don't, it's just going to use the default that's set up for my account. And then I hit next. That takes me into the actual email editor. And here it is. So we've got a template already, so it's laid out for me. If I didn't select a template, I'd have a big blank white screen, and I would need to build it myself. When you build it yourself, you kind of use these tabs over here in reverse order. You go right to left, because I'll go to my settings and set the content area width and all my background. Then I can go to rows and construct how I want this to look, right? So by default, everything is single column width. But up here, I've got a split row, and that's this one right here. Split left and right, right? I can do a 3/4 split either way, split all the way across. However I want to do that, so I can drag that row in to say, hey, I want to have 2 content blocks side by side. Then over here, I can drag the actual content blocks in. So like this here is a text block. Here's a button, right? Another text block. Here's the image block, right? And that's just as simple as dragging these, like the divider, dragging it in. You see it says drag it here. Drop it. There's my divider line. Then if I click on that, I get some settings over here to customize it. Okay. For your images, right over here, I can apply effects to it. I can link it to a URL. Delete this altogether if I want to. For these here, the social buttons, I can make sure they're connected to my social accounts. I can configure how I want the icons to appear. I've got a special way I want those to look. It's totally fine. I am not limited to just those 3 that are there. I can add additional ones. Also totally fine. For my buttons, right, configure the way the button appears and everything else. For images, you see here it says drop your file here. Well, I don't have a file to drop here. I can click browse, and that takes me into this whole file management system in here for images. So I've got a folder here with my files, and that's where I've got all the images I've used and some other emails. If I don't have an image and I need to find one, there is a button in here to even search for free stock photos. So I could say, hey, I need to search for something for donation, and it's going to give me a bunch of images that I could bring in. Select any one of them and drop them in.
This looks super familiar to the MailChimp environment that I'm more used to.
Yeah, pretty comparable. For your text block, right, you're going to get this toolbar up here to configure the font and everything else. And there you've got your merge tags. That's how you can pull in merge fields. Right, all the contact fields will be there, including contact custom fields. They're available in there. And then also, say in my footer, that's where I can add in some of the special links for managing unsubscribes. Either a global unsubscribe link, or I could do a group unsubscribe link. I'd recommend doing the group. That lets someone unsubscribe from this email list. It's associated with this email. Or a subscription preferences page if I want them to go and manage, hey, I want to unsubscribe from these 3 lists. All right, I know that was a quick review. I have someone waiting on me for another call, so I do have to jump onto that one. But I will also make sure that I share this recording with you so that you can go back through it. And if there's other questions that you have to follow up on this, just let me know. I'm happy to help with those too.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, thanks, Scott.
Sure thing. And hey, congratulations in being close to live.
Yeah, thanks.
You got it.
Now the fun starts.
There you go.
All right.
Bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.